Hello, class. I need a new intro. Music would be nice, something like that. But anyway, here we are. Here I am. Here we are. Wonder how many people listen to these review ones. I wonder how many listen to the actual. I'm not sure, but anyway, I do this because trying to help you as best I can with a little review on urinary system, and I put the fluid electrolytes at the end of this. So going to be excellent. I don't know if you saw. This is Ash. Oh, he's thrilled. Say something. I'm not gonna say anything. All right, let's get right to it. All right, so this urinary system, and traditionally it's a tough one. I mean, the anatomy, you can learn the anatomy, but the physiology of it, looking at the tubes and the exchange of ions, and we could have went, there's much more detail here, obviously, kidney physiology, and medically, pharmacologically, so much, complexity here with the kidneys and how they do it. And if you think, it makes sense because how amazing these things are. So the kidneys, they make the amount of water that you retain, they control that beautifully every day, minute by minute. It's they control your urine has to get rid of water. It's one of the ways as humans we have to get rid of water. Like there's no way around it. And if we're super dehydrated, we minimize that. But still, we need water to wash away that urea in the waste. And our kidneys are the ones that keep us our water constant, the amount of water. And then every one of these electrolytes, the composition, the chemistry of our plasma and our blood and our body fluids is the kidneys really control that. They are individually work on each one of these chemicals: sodium, bicarbonate, creatinine, urea, all these chemicals. Your kidney has the ability to reclaim them, not pee them out, or purposely pee them out, is push them into the urine. And this transfer of all these chemicals between your blood and the urine, some of that is passive. For instance, you should know that water is always passive. Water follows the salt. But glucose, it takes ATP, so it's actively pumped. We actively take back the glucose from the filtrate that's formed because we think it's valuable. So some things are actively transported, other things are passively transported. And at the end, we filter all this blood, an amazing amount of blood, and we end up with a couple liters of urine that we pee out. And that's going to take not only our waste, but also our excess electrolytes. You eat a bunch of cheese, you got too much calcium, your kidneys can get rid of calcium. You eat too many pretzels and get rid of too much sodium chloride. So, your urine is going to reflect what's going on in your body. Your body's going to use your urine as a way to get rid of excess chemicals in your blood. Yep. So I see it as getting rid of the waste. And again, what waste are we talking about? We're talking about nitrogenous wastes. From breaking down amino acids, you get nitrogen. It turns into ammonia, toxic. So we put ammonia together with another ammonia and we make urea. That's how we mostly get rid of it. And breaking down nucleic acids, we get a lot of uric acid. It's got 4 nitrogens in it. And we can get rid of that too. And just ammonia, like fish and stuff, just pee out ammonia. So that's what we're doing. We're getting rid of waste with our kidneys. And the more protein-rich diet you eat, the more your kidneys have to work to get rid of it. And the homeostasis, I was talking about water and electrolytes and chemicals. Your kidneys control that. All right, that's big picture, huh? Now let's talk about the gross anatomy of the kidney. Actually, I'm going to go real quickly with that because you don't need me to explain that part. Then the nephron, microscopic anatomy, and then most of the nephrons are up in the cortex, but there's like 20% are juxtamedullary. They have big, long loops for controlling water. And then we'll talk about the physiology of it in urine. And then we'll end up talking about the ureters and the bladder and the urethra. All right. So some things that could be on the test. Talk about what you wonder, like how much of your water can you lose, and about 12% before death. And then how much blood do these kidneys, which weigh like 1% of your body weight, they receive 25% of your cardiac output. So tons of blood goes through those renal arteries, through the kidneys, renal veins, as it's filtered. Your kidneys filter your blood. And then also your kidneys, importantly, is the spot where you make erythropoietin, EPO, which is going to make red blood cells. And then vitamin D is activated there with parathyroid hormones, can activate vitamin D so you can absorb calcium. And then renin. Renin is when your blood pressure is low, the kidneys secrete renin. And renin is going to make angiotensin 2, which is going to raise your blood pressure for many reasons. I'll review it quickly here. All right, your kidney, yeah, I didn't not much time, but yeah, here's your kidney. It's got a capsule on the outside. This is the hilum, is where the arteries and veins are going to come in, and where your ureter is going to leave, right? And then out here, you're going to have pyramids. Yeah. And then this region out here is the cortex, and the inner region is your medulla. It's a pyramid, right? The tip of your pyramid is called the papilla. And then the region of the cortex that dives down between the pyramids is called your renal columns. And then the papilla is where the urine is going to drip out. It's going to drip into these minor calyces, and a bunch of minor calyces will turn to a major calyx, and then meet another major calyx. And this is the renal pelvis, where all the calyces come together. And once urine is made at the papilla, it travels through the minor calyx, major calyx, pelvis, ureter, bladder, urethra, toilet, or woods, or whatever. All right. And then looking at it, if I ask you where the glomeruli are, the whole renal corpuscle, only in the cortex. See, the cortex has these: medulla, tube, tube, tube. Medulla is tubes and blood vessels. There's no renal corpuscles there. Tubes. All right, that's going to be the theme for the kidney. It's just miles of proximal tube, distal tube, loops, and collecting ducts. So tons of tubes. And as you know, the blood is filtered here, and all this plasma, all this water comes out, and everything comes out, right? And then the tubes are where you're going to reclaim the good stuff, and you can kick out some bad stuff there too. Blood vessels, I'm not even going to tell you about it. You can just know renal artery, interlobular, arcuate, so the path of blood. And then the nephron, of course, anatomy, basically. This is your renal corpuscle. It's going to be, the glomerulus is the ball of capillaries. You have an afferent arteriole coming in, an efferent arteriole leaving, so A before E. Then the efferent is going to turn to paratubular capillaries, which will work to absorb stuff back into the blood after it leaves the glomerulus. And the tube system, here's the proximal tube. Remember, that has all the glucose, most of the water, like 70% of the stuff, I think, it's like 70, is reabsorbed in that proximal tube. That's important. The loop, you got a descending, ascending part of the loop. That's about making salty gradients through this countercurrent exchange, right? The distal tube, and that's going to go into collecting ducts, which will go all the way down. Many of them dump into that. Again, this is anatomy. Shouldn't need to explain this, because I've already explained it, but here's when you look at the ball of capillaries, you can see the afferent, much bigger tube. And because it's the smaller tube leaving, it's going to back up the pressure. Let's see, more stuff's going to leave. So by having a big afferent and a small efferent, you've built up the pressure, the back pressure, and then all this fluid's going to be squeezed out. Yep. And you have this cup, which is continuous with this layer on the glomerulus, the visceral versus parietal layer. And that visceral layer is cool because these are these foot cells, these podocytes. Yeah. So what's this membrane that's going to filter your blood? You're going to have a capillary with lots of holes in it. Then you're going to have these little foot cells make these little feet. And then you're going to have a basement membrane. So this is the membrane. So this shows you the capillary, how holy it is. And then here, close up of a podocyte. And it makes these little slits. And so you need to know that filtration membrane is going to be a holy or fenestrated capillary, basement membrane, And then these little things are going to be, the podocytes have little fingers that interdigitate. And so this is your filtration membrane. Super thin, lots of stuff can go through. What can't go through it? Well, blood cells, red blood cells, white blood cells, proteins are too big, they don't go through it. But water, salts, sugar, vitamins, hormones, those stuff can get through those little slits. Yep. And so normally you don't find albumin or blood, proteins or blood in your urine, but you can. If you exercise hard, or you have any kind of kidney damage, you can. But normally your urine does not have blood or proteins in it. All right, know what the juxtaglomerular apparatus is. That is going to be where the tube comes back up from the loop and it just kisses the glomerulus, and that's where it is going to measure blood pressure, how stretched that arteriole is, and how much sodium is coming up the tube. And so take a look at my lecture if you don't know what I'm talking about. And if it's too low, it secretes renin. All right, renin is secreted when you have too low blood pressure and your kidney recognizes it. Yeah, another view. You see the big old artery coming in, the afferent, and then the glomerulus, and the small efferent is going to cause fluid to leave into this urinary space or capsule space. And then where does it leave from there? The proximal tube. And immediately your body takes back water and sugar, everything, the good stuff that it wants. Some diseases, PKD, polycystic kidney disease, we'll review that. Kidney transplants, they don't go up here, they go down the pelvis, just easier. And then glomerulonephritis is when the glomeruli get damage, that filtration membrane. It's usually because of an infection, and antibodies clog it up and then cause inflammation. And kidney stones, something precipitates out. Usually if your urine is too concentrated, you're dehydrated, you're eating too many salts, you know, it's genetic too, but. All right, how are we doing? Yeah, all right. Not getting much feedback. That's okay. I recognize that. I prefer in-person teaching. You know, guys, I figured that out. All right, all right. So you make the urine 3 things. This sounds like a multiple choice question. I bet it is. I'm like 80% sure it is here. You're going to have the filtration is just everything coming out, non-selective, the good, the bad, cleaning out your pantry by everything coming out. And then you do a huge job of reabsorption in the tubes. You take back all the sugar, most of the tons of sodium, I should say that. Tons of water comes back. And then you can also do tubular secretion, where you purposely push out drugs or creatinine or anything you don't want. Yeah, and so what's in urine? Depends, over 90% water usually, mostly water, but then you're going to have waste, especially nitrogenous waste, urea, creatinine, uric acid, and then electrolytes of various kinds. But should be no sugar. There can be, but usually not. If you have diabetes, it will be. Yeah. All right, so remember the filtration is non-selective. Everything comes out the filter, good and the bad, and then you take back the good stuff, right? And you should know about 180 liters of filtrate is what you take out of your blood every 24 hours. So 48 gallons, I think about a 55-gallon drum, like a burn barrel. That's how much fluid is taken out. It's called the filtrate. Now you don't pee out that much, right? Because you reabsorb 90-some% of that. And so you only pee out a couple liters or a liter. Got it? So you make tons of fluid called the filtrate, and the tubes reabsorb most of that water and everything back. And again, when you look at this, what I want you to take out of it is that, oh, this could be a question. The plasma and the filtrate are about the same. They're non-selective, which means the amount of glucose in your plasma is the amount that filters out, because that filtration membrane does nothing for it. It just goes right past it. Got it? But the urine is where you've had a chance through the tubes to change things. And you should know you concentrate things like the urea. You want to get rid of the bad stuff. And then the glucose you take back. See your sodium. It's 142, but you usually pee out 128. So you usually kind of retain some of that. So remember that. Glucose, totally taking back. Vitamins, amino acids that get through, your body says, give me that, that's valuable. It purposely concentrates the nitrogenous wastes because you want to get rid of those. So that's the function of your kidneys right here. And then remember the big point? Filtrate, plasma, about the same, okay? Because everything comes through, it's non-selective. All right, so looking at, we're going to see, if I asked you guys, what is the, medically, what do they tell you? Like, what's your kidney function? How well is it working? GFR. Now that means glomerular filtration rate. Okay, that's how well it's working. And I asked you, what's the number one factor? Looking at how much your filtration rate is. You should say blood pressure. Blood pressure, number one. Low blood pressure, low GFR. High blood pressure, high GFR. Your body adjusts it all the time. And it adjusts it by constricting or relaxing those afferent efferent arterioles going to the glomerulus. So if you constrict that afferent arteriole, you're going to have less filtration because you've cut off the blood supply. But if you keep that open and you narrow the exit, it's going to be greater pressure, more is going to come out. So your body controls that. Your body's got to worry about blood pressure and your kidney filtration rate, all right? So if you lose a lot of blood, you almost bleed to death, I mean, your body is going to be in emergency mode, and your kidneys are going to be like, just put the minimum. It's going to constrict both of those so that you can keep your body's blood pressure and stay alive. But another important point is if your blood pressure gets too low, your kidneys will die. The tubes will no longer get enough fluid and those cells will die, and it's irreversible. So it's important your body keep blood running through your kidneys, or you've got, I don't know the amount of time, but you have a narrow window if your blood pressure is so low that your kidneys aren't even working. All right. 3 variables indeed are going to be, the big one is leaving, it's going to be the hydrostatic pressure or blood pressure. That is the big pressure pushing the fluid out. The 2 things opposing that are going to be osmosis, because that fluid, the water wants to come back up to the blood because the blood's got lots of stuff in it. It's like, oh yeah. And then capsular pressure, back pressure. And sometimes that can be high if you have some prostate or kidney stone pushing backwards. But the bottom line here is that blood pressure, that top number, is going to be bigger than those 2 negative numbers. And there's going to be an overall positive filtration rate. More fluid's going to leave. There it is, GFR. And yeah, so blood pressure is the plus, and the minus is going to be osmosis and the capsular back pressure. All right, there we go. All right, now we'll talk about renin a little bit. I'll ask you a question about this. So the deal with this is that you have floating around in your blood angiotensinogen. It's a protein, your liver makes it. You got it right now, you got it. Now the deal is that doesn't do anything, all right? But if the kidneys secrete renin because they've noticed the pressure, blood pressure is low, the renin converts that into angiotensin 1. That doesn't do much either. But the angiotensin 1 gets converted by this angiotensin converting enzyme, ACE, into angiotensin 2. And that's a powerful chemical that raises your blood pressure. So your kidneys notice your blood pressure is too low, and they cause a cascade of reactions that make angiotensin 2. And that's going to make you secrete aldosterone, which is going to make you retain sodium in your kidney, thus retaining water. They're going to make you secrete ADH, and that's going to make you retain water. Blood pressure goes up. It's going to constrict your blood vessels. It's going to make you thirsty. So all these things are going to work to your body to keep that blood pressure up. So your kidneys notice too low blood pressure, renin secreted, and your body should have listened to that angiotensin 2. And all of you should know that one way we control blood pressure, is what's called ACE inhibitors. And so if we inhibit this enzyme, you don't have any angiotensin 2. So if you have chronically high blood pressure, it could be because you have too much of this angiotensin 2, then you can go ahead and block that enzyme and you don't make it. You can't make it. And so it's a one way pharmacologically to keep your blood pressure low. All right, a little confusing. Well, it's cool. You should know it. All right, and then again, this just is showing that filtration is what happens up here, non-selective, pushes the fluid out through that membrane into the tubes. And the tubes do reabsorption, big time, taking back all the good, the water, and also secretion, where you actively get rid of stuff too. And at the end, you end up with pee, which is going to be the result of all this. Filtration, reabsorption, and then secretion. know that glucose takes energy. It's actively pumped back. Your body will take it all back. And then know you can pee out glucose. Your pee can be sweet with sugar in it. If you overload your kidney tubes, if you have too much sugar, let's say you're diabetic and you're not on insulin, or you eat a whole bunch of sugar, then all these transporters are overwhelmed. Everyone's working full time. Some sugar is going to get by. Right. So one sign you have too high blood sugar is that you have sugar in your urine. And again, protein shouldn't make it, but if you, we could do this in lab. We test your pee. A lot of you are going to have traces of protein. When you work out, the pressure is high. It's going to push some through. Definitely with kidney damage, you'll have protein in your urine. And then medically, it's a big problem. It's a big problem is that people then will lose a lot of protein in their urine if their kidneys are failed. And then they don't have enough protein in their blood. And then they have edema, right? Water leaves, but doesn't come back. So the loss of protein in the urine is a big killer problem with kidney disease. And then again, I put the slide so you remember water is always passive. You move the salt, the water follows. So you don't actively transport water ever. Water just follows the salt. And I put this slide in here just to show you that you reabsorb 99% of your water. You know, it filters out 180 liters, you reabsorb 178 of those liters. Right? And so because of that such a huge number, you can make little changes in that, and it can have a big effect on how much you pee. All right, So this is one of the complex things. And if you're not getting it, YouTube this. There's all kinds of videos, other people explaining it. But the deal is the whole purpose of that loop is that you have a filtrate going down and up. Then you have blood going in the opposite direction. And the tubes, the descending tube is permeable to water. So water is going to leave. It becomes more salty as it comes down. The ascending tube is impermeable to water. Water can't leave. And the tubes pump out the salt. And so then the blood's going the opposite way. The blood captures that salt and brings it down. Oh my God. And so you set up the system with counter current, with the blood going one direction, the fluid going the other direction, and one side water leaving like crazy because it's getting salty, and one side you're pumping out salt. So it gets watery as it comes up, and you end up with this gradient where it's wicked salty down here at the bottom, and then it's less salty towards the top. And this gradient, the only reason you make this gradient in the medulla is in order to have the ability to pee out watery, dilute pee or concentrated pee. That's the only reason we have this whole complicated setup is to do that. Because, as you can see, it's very dilute, this filtrate, by the time it gets, and this is the collecting duct. So by the time the filtrate comes down, it's very dilute. And if you drink too much water, it allows you to pee that out, because this collecting duct, you make it impermeable to water, and the water can't go out. Even though it's wicked salty out here, it wants to leave, it can't because there's no holes. And then if you have EDH makes aquaporins, or holes in the collecting duct. Then as the watery pee filtrate comes down, the water freaking leaves like crazy, and you end up with very concentrated urine. All right. I've lectured on that before, and I'm doing it again. Maybe it's going to click. Parts of it will click this time. So I'm going to ask you questions such as, is the descending limb permeable to water? Yes. Ascending limb permeable to water? No. Where is sodium and chloride pumped out actively? In the ascending limb, you pump this out. The blood is going in the opposite direction. And so the blood gets really salty, but it comes back to normal because your blood stays normal. Right? So, but it temporarily gets really salty, and it just uses as a transport mechanism for water and salt, the blood. Yeah, that's called a countercurrent multiplier because it gets more and more salty as you go down, or countercurrent exchange because you have currents. Countercurrent means going different directions, and then you have this exchange that takes place. And this is just a small little bit here. Remember, the loops are really long. If we could draw the whole thing, they're really long. So they have a lot of opportunity for this transfer to take place. And so as you go down, it gets saltier and saltier and saltier. All right. All right, that was a big concept there. And then this just shows you when you don't have much ADH, you pee out dilute urine. When you have ADH, you open up these pores and you have concentrated urine. And where's the sensor for this? How do you know how dehydrated you are? Up in your brain, you have sensor cells that will either shrivel up like raisins or blow up. And that's going to tell your hypothalamus to release ADH via your posterior pituitary gland. All right, how's this look? Yep, a little more detail here. I don't go into like all the ions. And if I don't go into it, I'm not going to ask you that, right? You know, in particular, but I want you guys to study it. I want you guys to learn all you can. Yeah. All right, then my last lecture, just know what urea is. It's going to have, get rid of the 2 nitrogens. Yep, definitely. No uric acid. And then I mentioned a disease here, gout. And so I could ask you about gout. Gout is uric acid that precipitates out in your joints, especially your big toe. As you get older, it's more of a problem in some people. And if I ask you what urine is, see what urine, it's 95% water, depends on how concentrated your urine is. But yeah, electrolytes can have some, some proteins can get through. Yeah, and the volume varies with how hydrated you are. Know the term renal clearance. Renal clearance is the volume of your blood, which something can be removed per time, per hour, per minute. So renal clearance is, it's telling you, how good is your kidney at getting rid of it. And my example is glucose. It's 0 renal clearance because you don't get rid of it. You hold on to it. And other drugs, the renal clearance differs. And so in pharmacy, you want to know what's the clearance of this drug. I mean, how often do you have to give the drug, antibiotic or something, and how long does it stay in your system? All right, that's pretty much physiology. And then let's just home stretch here. The bladder and the ureters are lined by transitional epithelium. Absolutely. Know the path. It goes from the minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, down the ureters, into the bladder, and out the urethra to the outside. Looking at, it's got a mucus coat on the inside, a big muscular coat, a smooth muscle, and then a connective tissue on the outside with fat and everything. And then know that the ureters come in at a highly oblique angle, a steep angle. So that works kind of as a valve so that things don't back up. When the bladder fills, it kind of closes off that pathway up. The bladder, the muscle is called the detrusor. And when you have to pee, it's going to contract and increase the pressure. And then if your sphincter is open or closed, the pee will come out, or you'll hold on to it. And then your mind will tell the detrusor to relax until you're ready, right? Talked about male and female differences there. And then the urethra is much shorter in females than males, and so more likely to get bladder infections. Yeah, and the male has a prostate, which always causes problem in the old men. It just enlarges, and you can have prostate cancer, but enlarged prostate doesn't have to be cancer. It can just hypertrophy and cause issues with the urine be able to get through. Fancy word for peeing or urinating is micturition. And we had a little video you can see of that. It's a little, but pretty much your sacral region. Down here is where there's this loop, autonomic loop, parasympathetic nerves that will cause you to pee, but you have an external sphincter that you control somatically with your brain. So if you decide it's not time to pee, just keep that sphincter closed and you can hold off for a while, right? There's an internal sphincter that's autonomically controlled. And when you're a baby, you don't control either. So there's a certain point when you control these. And as the bladder fills, it stretches and it makes this micturition reflex, but you can overwhelm that with your cerebrum and tell it to wait. Yep, and lifespan changes. Mostly, again, I mentioned we have 2 kidneys. And so we have an abundance of kidney tissue so that with age, usually you have enough kidney. It's not the cause of death if your kidneys don't get diseased. As long as you have 2 kidneys, everything goes downhill. I mean, the functioning goes downhill. If you give drugs to an older person, they have a different renal clearance than a younger person because you just, tubes get scarred and you get less tube tubes totally. So yeah, obviously. And then other things, older people have to pee more, they have a less elastic bladder, and prostate issues with men cause urination problems. Yeah. All right. Oh, a lot of water. I don't need it for hydration. I need it, for my wet my speaking. All right, this will be pretty quickly. I'll just get to the big points. This particular chapter, there'll be less questions on this chapter, of course, but mainly I'm going to ask you, what are the sources of water and electrolyte input, and what are the sources of water electrolyte loss? All right, and then big picture, where is water in your body? Well, you can see it's about 2/3 in your cells, intracellular water, and 1/3 is outside of your cells. And then you should know that muscle has a lot more water. I forgot the percentages. It's a lot of water in muscle compared to fat, which has very little water. And so males having generally more muscle mass, they're generally made up of more water, but it varies. And with obesity means you're made up of less and less water per weight too, because fat doesn't have much water. Oil and water don't mix, so there's not a lot of fat and water, but there's a lot in muscle. And then with age too, a little fetus is like 90% water, right? And you guys are more like 70% water. And then as you get older, you can see it goes down and down. And then how does water move between these different compartments? And I even mentioned, like, we have intracellular water in our cells, but the extracellular can be your plasma, the water in your eyes, right? The water in your joints, all these things. So I look those over again too, could ask you about that. But how does water move like between cells and extracellular? Osmosis and pressure, that's all. And that because of the blood pressure, water leaves the blood vessels, capillaries, right? And that excess fluid, osmosis sucks it back into the blood, most of it. But that excess get carried in the lymph. And differences in pressure and osmosis move water and electrolytes. And then don't forget, electrolytes and water, the concentrations are linked. They're not, because the electrolytes are dissolved in water, so less water, you're gonna have higher electrolyte concentration. All right, so where does it come in? Let's say about 60% drinking fluids, 30% wet food, and then 10% is this water of metabolism, just that forms water as a byproduct of our metabolism. Let's see. Oh, another important point. At what percentage water loss do you become thirsty? 1%. So very little, right? A little, I guess. 12% you're dead. So maybe that's getting, maybe that makes sense. But for me, it sounds like 1%. That doesn't sound like much. Okay, but you lose a little bit of water and you become thirsty. You start searching out water, right? And then another important point is that, hypothalamus is going to recognize whether you're thirsty or not. The cells will swell or shrink up. And then when you drink, that water hitting your stomach and expanding a little bit is going to cause you to not be thirsty. So you don't wait until this water has reached your cells, because then you would always overshoot it. Because it takes a while for the water to be absorbed into your blood. So if you drink and you're still thirsty, then you've got so much water, then all of a sudden you have too much water, you got to pee. So you know what I mean? So that's kind of a subtle thing, but I like that. It's kind of cool how your body doesn't wait until the water, fixes you. It's like assuming if you're drinking, all right, that water's going to, reach my blood pretty soon. How do we lose water? Number one, urine. Again, this makes sense. As me, evolutionary biologist, when you look at other animals like beavers in the pond, they don't care, right? They got water everywhere, right? But a desert rat, it makes a huge difference, right? We have urine that has to have water. So it's a way we get rid of most of our water is peeing it out. Feces, gonna have to get rid of water in our waste there. And then sweating and evaporation from our skin. And then our lungs. Each breath out gets rid of water, doesn't it? Cold day, you can see that the water droplets. Breathe on a mirror, you see the water coming out, right? So skin and lungs is about 28%. So mostly in our pee, and then it'll be in our evaporating from our skin and our lungs. So we get rid of our fluid. And what can you control is the urine. You can't control the water that comes out when you breathe, but you can make concentrated urine if you're worried about water. Electrolytes. We get most of that when we eat and drink. You drink electrolytes, Pedialyte or energy drink, not energy drink, but like, what you drink when you work out, that kind of stuff. It has electrolytes in it, right? So that's where we get that. And then of course, some of it comes from, when we break down our food, there's electrolytes that come off there too. Oh, I'm sorry. But when we metabolic reactions, like you break down ATP, you get a phosphorus comes off, right? So some electrolytes come from our reactions, of course. But big picture, we bring them in what we eat and drink. Where do we lose them? We pee a lot out, all right? So again, our urine's the greatest loss of water. It's also the greatest loss of electrolytes. But then, in our waste, and then every time we sweat, we lose sodium and chloride and electrolytes that way too. And so normally you get enough electrolytes with your normal diet, but if you're lacking electrolytes, you'll have a salt craving. Yeah, so the greatest output is definitely going to be urine. So we're going to pee out the most electrolytes. All right, then I talked quite a bit about dehydration. It affects us all. And so I want you guys to review that to see what are some of the symptoms of slight or extreme dehydration. So take a look at that. You can have a rapid heart rate and breathing, but like weak pulse, and you're going to dry out. And yeah, so look at all that. And then I talked about when you when you have too much water intoxication, too much water, what happens is you get hyponatremia, which means not enough sodium. The sodium, you have so much water, the sodium becomes so dilute, and that causes death, if you don't fix that right away. Definitely. So that's hyponatremia. Hypernatremia would be too much sodium. You lose tons of water and you get really salty. That will cause death too. And then we had hypo and hyperkalemia with a K, and that's potassium too. So these are all things that can happen to people, and do understand those terms and what they mean. All right, then we talk about pH. And do you remember what our pH has to be? Is it acidic or alkaline? Actually, a little alkaline, between 7.35 and 7.45 should be our pH normally. And normally, if I ask you, do we produce more acids or bases in normal metabolism? You say more acids. And then I say, like, what's our major way to become acidic? It's that carbon dioxide. It's holding your breath. So yeah, so we produce a lot more acids at the end of the day. If you look at the balance sheet, it's more acids. So our urine is usually acidic because we're getting rid of acid that way. Okay. So definitely we get rid of, obviously most of it is going to be when you break down sugar, you get carbon dioxide. It's going to make carbonic acid. But yeah, lactic acid, you guys are doing sprints, something like that. Know what ketones are from burning fats and what ketoacidosis is. I talked about that. And then, other acids from sulfur and phosphate metabolism. Here's ketoacidosis. If you're in front of me, I'd ask you if you need me to go over it. I don't want to go over all of it, but pretty much that if your cells can't burn sugars, they burn fats. And if they burn fats, you make ketones, which are acidic. Normally not a problem, but too many ketones shifts your pH way too acidic, and it can kill you, right? And so it's from burning fats. So it could be starvation or diabetes, especially because you've got plenty of sugar, but it can't get in the cells without insulin. All right, and basically you should also know, we're going to talk about a strong acid dissociates completely, and a weak acid kind of dissociates like halfway or something like that. And I guess a bottom line question could be buffers. Is that the next thing? Yeah, we're talking about buffers. They convert a strong acid to a weak acid or a strong base to a weak base. And they're going to buffer or keep that homeostasis. If I put a bunch of acid, they're going to absorb that. A bunch of base, they're going to absorb that. They're going to keep it stable as best they can. So how do we keep this homeostasis of our pH? Three things. We have chemical buffers that work immediately, and then breathing, respiratory, get rid of carbon dioxide, you become more alkaline. And then, of course, our kidneys can pee out acids or bases to help with our homeostasis. Yes, kidneys and lungs. And chemical instant. It's chemistry. It happens in a test tube. You put, and it's going to be, we'll talk about that next, right? Oh, okay. But you should know mostly I had a phosphate system and then proteins on their own. And then the big one was, carbon dioxide and water make carbonic acid, which make hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. So that's our main buffer. We take a bunch of carbon dioxide in, it's going to turn into carbonic acid, and it's going to buffer big changes. So that happens immediately. The respiratory, by breathing, that takes a while, and especially peeing out, it's going to take a while. So, but these are the ways the buffers: chemical, respiratory, and then renally, using our kidneys. All right. And outside of that narrow range, we have alkalosis if we're too alkaline or basic, acidosis if we're too acidic, and both cause death. Okay. There. I think this was a little longer because I covered a couple things. All right. Any last words of wisdom? The tests will have respiratory, urinary, and then some on this last chapter with electrolytes, water, and acids, bases, pretty much. All right. Good luck. I hope this helps some people. And yeah, we are done.